Hey everybody, I'm JJ, you're watching Reality Survival, and today we're going to talk about the top 50 items that you could keep in a Faraday cage. And it might be kind of important to do so given all of the nonsense that's going on over in Russia and Ukraine. So let's start out with a little bit of explanation on what an EMP is and why you might need to protect some of your electronic items in a Faraday cage, and I'll explain what a Faraday cage is, then we'll talk about these items. So I know we got a lot of new subscribers and I may not have covered this in the past. So an EMP is an electromagnetic pulse. Now, in the context of most prepping type scenarios, what we generally think of as an EMP is coming from one of two things. One would be a coronal mass ejection coming from the sun, and like a major solar flare, and basically it sends out all these ionized particles, and it interacts with our ionosphere, and it creates this electromagnetic wave that kind of goes over the area that it hits. Now, a coronal mass ejection especially has a bad effect on long transmission lines, anything that can gather a lot of energy over a wider area. And so like our power grid is, for example, is the thing that it would be the hardest on. It probably wouldn't have a real bad effect on smaller handheld electronic devices unless it was extraordinarily powerful, unless it was of much higher intensity than what we would normally see or have categorized in the past. So for purposes of what we're talking about today with smaller handheld items or even mid-size items, we probably don't need to worry about a coronal mass ejection so much. However, the second category of EMP comes from a high altitude nuclear detonation, and that is where a nuclear bomb is set off anywhere from, let's say, 200 to 350 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, and it puts out all that ionizing radiation which interacts with the ionosphere, and there's something called the Compton effect that sort of multiplies this. As it rushes down and takes a hard right, it pushes out this three-phase wave. So you've got the E1 phase, E2 phase, and the E3 phase. The E1 phase is a very fast blast, it's a very fast phase, and that is the wave that is going to present the biggest problems to handheld electronic devices. The second wave is sort of like the speed with less intensity, but the speed of a lightning bolt. And then the third phase is a slower phase than that, and that is one that's most similar to a coronal mass ejection. And so in the E1 happens in billionths of a second, or millionths of a second anyway. The E2 is less than a second, we're talking like microseconds, and then the E3 is in under a second or around a second or two. So it's sort of these these waves, these pulses. Now, I used to say that the chances of an electromagnetic pulse going off are very, very low. It's extraordinarily unlikely. That's becoming less and less true, unfortunately. It is rising to the level of concern for me, just because Vladimir Putin is having a really hard time in Ukraine, and he is only going to accept so much losses before he decides to use tactical nukes. At least that's my guess. I don't know. And so he's got to figure out a way out where he can save face and look like he, and maintain leadership in a leadership position within the Russian government, or he's going to have to have a decisive win. And his military is not up to it. We just saw the news today where his Kinzhal hypersonic missiles were shot down by Patriot battery. So it's not looking good for him over there. It's just really not. And so I'm a little concerned. But nevertheless, let's get back to the topic on hand here. EMPs. So I've told you what the two types of EMPs are. There are basically two ways to protect your devices in your home. And the first way is a Faraday cage, and that's what we're going to talk about primarily today. Now, a Faraday cage is a box usually constructed of metal. It can be constructed of wire mesh, fairly tightly woven wire mesh. But generally speaking, most people will use some sort of a metal conductive container. And then you have to seal those containers up. And when I say seal them up, what I mean is that all the seams have to have conductivity between them. So for example, if you were going to use a 50 caliber ammo can, and let's say you took it right from the factory and you used it, you put some stuff inside of it, and you closed it, and it was exposed to an EMP, that would not work. There's a couple reasons, but primarily the biggest one is that rubber gasket around the top of it needs to be removed, and then you need to have bare metal to bare metal contact between the lid of the can and the body of the can. And the reason for that is it's an effect called the skin effect. So when the electromagnetic pulse travels over the top of that can and around it, the electricity will stay to the outside of the can and pass over it as long as there's nothing that's kind of pulling it inside. The second reason that I said it wouldn't work is you also want to make sure that you line the container with a non-conductive material, something like cardboard or carpet or foam or something like that. Just give a little layer in between the exterior wall and the items that you're putting inside of it. Okay, so on like a 50 caliber ammo can, some people will take steel wool and kind of glue it in place in place of kind of grind it down on the inside and the outside, and then put that steel wool there and glue it in place. That will make a good Faraday cage like that. The galvanized trash cans is what I've used in the past. Those work really, really well. You can get like the 15-gallon oil containers from like Jiffy Lube and stuff like that. Those oil barrels that are all metal, those work pretty good. There's a lot of different things you could use. So anyway, that's the primary way to protect small handheld electronic devices or mid-sized electronic devices. The other way to protect stuff is to use an EMP Shield. Now, EMP Shield is it's a company that I'm an affiliate with. If you use the discount code Reality Survival at empshield.com, I can save you $50 per unit. Now, what you can do is you can put these units on your home. You can put them on your car, you can put them on solar panels, you can put them on ham radio equipment, you can put them on ATVs, tractors, any 12 volt or 120 volt system. They even have them for 240 volt systems as well. And I think they've got up to it might be 3-phase. So even industrial applications. You put these devices on there, and what they do is they monitor, the EMP Shield monitors your electronics, the wiring in your home, everything that's hooked into your grid. So anything that's plugged into the wall or anything like that, it's going to monitor that system, and if it detects, it's a very fast device. It operates at the billionths of a second level. And so if it sees an immediate spike in the voltage in the system, it will shunt that energy to ground really quickly and keep everything within normal parameters. And what that does is that keeps the heat from building up in your, say, microwave, in the chips in your microwave or in your refrigerator or whatever the case may be, and that keeps them from melting and getting fried. Okay, and that's a pretty good deal because if there is an electromagnetic pulse, the latest study from EPRI, which is a 3-year study, says that it could take somewhere between like 3 months and 6 months before the grid comes back up. So, and it could potentially be longer. The old congressional report said that it might be like 3 to 5 years or whatever. Anyway, who knows? It's going to be a little while. Most likely it's probably going to be several months long. It's probably going to be several months long before the grid comes back up. Now what that means is that you'll be out without power for a while. Now you'll need to have the ability to generate your own power for a short term at your own location. Solar generators, regular generators. We've talked about different options, stuff like that. There's several different things, and we'll talk about some of them here later on in this video. Now, and then the other thing is that once the power grid comes back up, there's going to be a whole lot of people out there whose all their appliances are going to have been ruined by the pulse. So the supply chain is going to be a mess for years. It's going to be a disaster. But if your house is protected, then your stuff will still work once the grid comes back up again. So you'll be more squared away there. And the other thing is putting them on your vehicles. If you spend a lot of time away from your home at work, if you commute quite a ways, that kind of thing, if there is an electromagnetic pulse, having a vehicle is going to make it much easier to get home. Now some people will say, yeah, but having a vehicle will make you a target. Well, in the first few hours of this thing happening, everybody's going to be confused. The mass majority of people are going to be confused. And yes, it might be a little bit difficult to get through the traffic, but I guarantee you it's a lot easier than trying to walk the whole way. And you're going to be more vulnerable to, the passions of the crowd and that kind of thing when you're walking as well. So I personally would prefer to have a vehicle. I drive a truck, and I guarantee I can move cars out of my way with my F-350. So I think it makes sense to put an EMP shield on your house and your vehicles. That just makes sense to me. But it also makes sense to have a Faraday cage, because there are some things that are not going to be protected by the EMP shield. Handheld mobile devices, handheld electronic devices, all that kind of stuff are not going to be protected. Now, a cell phone is not going to be any good because the whole cell phone network will be down. But you could get information off this. You could have lots of stuff on it, that kind of thing. If you've got old cell phones, you could put them in a Faraday cage. If you could store information on them in PDFs. There's lots of different ways and things that you could use them for. So anyway, let's go through this. I've got 50 items on here. I've got 7 different categories right here outlined. So the first category is power sources. And this would have to be, the size of the item will determine the size of the Faraday cage that you need to build, right? So some of these are going to require a bigger Faraday cage because they're bigger items if you want to put them in. But there are some ways around some of these, so let me go on. So solar panels are number 1. You could have solar panels out in your yard and hooked up, and then you could hook an EMP shield to it, and they're going to be fine. But they are a big antenna. There's a lot of little wires that are stretching around in there, and so those will get fried. So you need to have them protected some way. So if you have them out, already installed, put the EMP shield on it. If you don't have them installed and you're going to kind of just save them for a rainy day kind of thing, then put them inside of a Faraday cage to make sure that they'll work. The second thing in power source category is a solar charge controller. Solar charge controller, if it's exposed, will get fried, again, unless it's in a Faraday cage or has an EMP shield. The next one is a solar generator. So like the EcoFlow Deltas or the Blue Yetis or any number of the different solar generators that are out on the market today, those are highly susceptible to being affected by an EMP. And so they need to be protected as well. Now, if you had those plugged into your house grid and you were charging it, then it would be protected if your house had an EMP shield on it. So you'd be good to go in that regard. But if you didn't have it plugged into your house, then it's not going to be protected. So it would need to have an EMP shield, or a Faraday cage or a Faraday bag. Okay, so the next item on the list is a solar battery charger. So a solar battery charger is a small solar panel that has a couple of alligator clips on it that can hook to a battery to charge up or keep charged, kind of a trickle charge, your car batteries and stuff like that. So the next item on the list is portable power banks. Different little portable batteries, the like Anchor style batteries and that kind of thing. Those are pretty handy to have and are good to keep in a Faraday cage as well. The next one is a battery charger for just your small batteries like your 9 volt, your AA, your AAA, your C and D cell batteries. and then also a 12-volt battery charger, 120 volt, that you plug into the wall. Those would be good items to have as well. Next item would be alternative electricity generators. So they've got like hand crank generators. You could use a car alternator, a treadmill motor, hydroelectric generators, wind generators, you know, small scale stuff. Those kinds of things might be good to put in there as well. Then also DC to AC inverters. So you get your car running because it's got an EMP Shield on it or whatever. You could plug this into your cigarette lighter or hook it up to your battery and be able to generate, you know, I think I've seen them up to 3,000 watts before, something along those lines. So they can produce quite a bit of power depending on the size that you get them. You know, they can be down as low as 150 watts up to, you know, like I said, 2,000 or 3,000. Those are a real easy way to have some power in a crisis situation as well. So always good to have some of those around. Then you've got your small inverter generator, like your little Predator from Harbor Freight or the little Honda generators. You know, they're usually anywhere from like 1,800 to 2,200 watts or something along those lines, and they're small enough that you could get them to fit, you know, in a decent sized Faraday cage. Then the last one on the category here is a larger dual fuel generator. Now, I always recommend a dual fuel generator because propane is the best fuel from a long-term storage standpoint. It's basically good indefinitely. The problem is propane is just slightly less powerful in the BTUs, so if the generator is rated at 10,000 watts, it'll probably only put out about 9,000 if it's propane. Then when you run on gas, it would give you a little bit more power. The problem with gas is it only lasts a couple of years. You know, if you're using a good stabilizer like PRIG or something along those lines. But it tends to gum up the carburation and all that kind of stuff. If you leave that in there, if you don't run the bowl dry and all that kind of stuff, then you end up having problems with the needles and the floats sticking and everything, and they just never run quite right. So personally, I like to run mine on propane unless there's no other option, and then I'll finally go to gas. So that's all in the first category. The second category is communication devices. So with communication devices, I'll just run down this list pretty quick because they're all, you know, kind of basic. Two-way radios, walkie-talkies, and their chargers. Don't forget to put their chargers in there. Emergency weather radios, AM/FM radios, shortwave radios, and that's going to help you with more long-distance broadcasts and stuff. Then you've got your citizen band radio. That's going to give you shorter range unless you've got single sideband on it. Then you can reach out there pretty good. And then you've got any kind of ham radio equipment as well. And you could also throw in here GMRS, MERS, you know, the other types of radios as well that we've talked about here on the channel. So any kind of handheld, walkie-talkie, or communication device in general, go ahead and throw those in a Faraday cage, or at least some of those. Next category is lighting. So we're talking about flashlights, headlamps, LED lanterns, LED bulbs for your house. And a lot of people don't think about that, but especially if you don't have an EMP shield in your house, all those bulbs, you know, are all going to be fried from the E1 pulse, so you're going to need some extra LED bulbs. I think that's an important one. Spare set of vehicle headlight bulbs, and accessory LED light bars. What I'm talking about here is like those Nightlight light bars. Those could be really useful in a lot of different situations, but I'm thinking of on like ATVs, or at a roadblock situation. Maybe you're going to block off your road to keep, you know, looters and rioters and all that kind of stuff out, and you want the ability to be able to turn on a light and kind of shine outward towards the crowd. Some of those LED light bars would be really good for that. And you can set them up with just a switch and a 12-volt battery, and, you know, I mean, it's super, super easy. And then another one would be like a flashing LED light bar. So in that instance, we're talking about like if you wanted to keep your neighborhood blocked off and only allow neighbors in and out that live there, then you might want to have some sort of like flashing yellow light or something like that to kind of make things look like official, or to draw attention to the fact that there is a roadblock here. You know, don't just keep driving, that kind of thing. Okay, and obviously if you're going to do that, you know, something like that kind of situation, that's going to be in a situation where there's no longer a functioning government and you are kind of on your own, right? You're not going to do that if law enforcement and stuff's in there unless you're able to get permission from them, which that could be possible too. So the fourth category is computing and data storage. So USB drives, external hard drives with important files, documents, and software, backup copies of having backup copies of critical data on optical media like DVDs and that kind of thing. And then laptops, personal computers, cell phones, tablets, any other kind of, you know, small computing device or whatever. Number 5, or the fifth category, is medical equipment. So here we're talking about hearing aids, a pulse oximeter, the little thing that goes on the end of your finger. That's a really good medical device to have. An automatic blood pressure reader, or digital thermometers might be another one you want to keep in there. Number 6 is tools. Here there are many different kinds. I'm just going to go through some of the basic ones. Any kind of multimeter or test light, or anything that's going to help you diagnose and work on electric and reestablishing electricity and, you know, that kind of thing, then that's going to be good. An OBD2 code reader, something that you can pull codes from a vehicle. I think it was the first congressional report, maybe it was the second one, said that, you know, 60 to 70% of vehicles would be affected in an EMP in a negative way. Some percentage of those might run somewhat, some percentage of them might not run at all. Hard to say, but being able to clear those codes out and or read the codes might be able to help you trace down what's going wrong if your vehicle, you know, was hit by an EMP. A timing light, if you have an older vehicle where you got, you know, points and condenser and you got to set the timing and everything like that, or even an HEI and you have to set the timing on the distributor, then a timing light gun might be another important one that you would want to keep in the Faraday cage. And then the last, if you're lucky enough to have some sort of computer diagnostic machine, you know, for vehicles, then, you know, that would be great to have protected as well. You could make a lot of money trying to fix people's vehicles, I would imagine. Number 7 here is miscellaneous category, and there's quite a few in here, so I'm going to run down them fairly quick because I know we're getting long. Digital cameras and video cameras. Those might be important for documenting the things that are going on, and it's not like you're going to put them up on YouTube or anything, but it could be good just from a standpoint if there's ever any legal question once the rule of law is reestablished and you're able to document some of the events and some of the things that happened and maybe talk to people directly afterwards and get testimony and those kind of things. I think that could be potentially important. Game cameras, not only for hunting but also for security around your property and stuff like that. Electronic watches or clocks. Electronic key fobs. This is important. Listen up. If you weren't listening, listen. Make sure that you keep at least one of your key fobs in a Faraday bag in your vehicle, even if you have an EMP shield for your vehicle. So what I'm talking about is these little electronic key fobs like this. Somebody pointed this out in the comments of one of my videos. I thought it was really very interesting. And, you know, there is some electronics inside these little key fobs. And so you would want to keep an extra key in your vehicle inside of a Faraday bag. Okay? And that way, if the key on your keychain is zapped and doesn't work, you have a spare. Now, here's the thing. It's questionable. It's questionable as to whether or not a key, a device this small will actually pick up enough energy to fry it or not. Because it's all based off of the size of the item and how much electricity it will pick up. This key has a very small signature. Now your keys that are connected to it might have a little bigger signature, so maybe they're going to help in bring in a little bit more. But it's hit and miss. I'm not convinced that they're going to be affected, but it's possible. So having an extra key stored in a Faraday bag in your vehicle is pretty smart. Okay, let's see here. Okay, an extra set of points and condenser and an HEI ignition module for older cars. Now, most people don't think that points will be affected and maybe that a condenser wouldn't be affected. I don't know for sure. To me, as cheap as they are, it seems like it would make sense to go ahead and have an extra set. I wouldn't be concerned about the points as much unless they fused together during the pulse, which you could probably fix and file down and all that kind of thing. But the condenser itself, I'm not exactly sure what's inside the condenser, and so I don't know if that could be affected or not. I know the traditional wisdom is that they won't be, but as cheap as it is, it seems like it would be a good idea to have an extra set, especially the HEI ignition modules. A lot of the pre-80 vehicles had HEI, high energy ignition, on their distributors, especially the GM motors, I know, and I'm sure others did as well. Having extra one of those ignition modules could be important for older vehicles. Same thing goes for the internal voltage regulators for older cars. Most of them were internal to an alternator. They were kind of built in the alternator, but some of them were external. So it kind of depends on what model of older vehicle you have, but it might not hurt to have an internal voltage regulator either, because I'm not exactly sure how those would be affected as well. Another good item, solar-powered calculators. We won't have the cell phones to be able to do this, to do the calculator thing, and we might not have computers and all that kind of stuff. So solar-powered calculators would probably be pretty useful, especially if you're not real good at the fuzzy math, Digital scales for measuring out things like that, different things. I could see how those could be useful. Electronic hair clippers, for buzzing your head, keeping a shaved head, or whatever the case may be. I think that would be smart to have. A small drone. Drones could be used for lots of different things, for pre-scouting the way ahead to make sure that there's no roadblocks, to doing, looking for forest fires to see if the forest fire is getting close to your area, or they can be used for a lot of different things in an emergency situation. So I could see how a drone could potentially have some use there as well. Then we've got all your tactical stuff like your night vision devices, your thermal infrared devices, your red dots for rifles, laser illuminators, all those kinds of things. Again, there's varying opinions out there on whether or not things like a small red dot would be affected. Now, if it's attached to a larger rifle, it's probably going to have a more of a higher chance of being affected. Personally, I always like to try to get optics that have an etched reticle as well. That way, if the red dot doesn't work, the etched reticle is still there. But anyway, if this is all just food for thought, just my opinions, throwing it out here. You guys can put whatever you want. It's just trying to help you think about things. Let's see. The next thing, got it almost done here, is a variety of old and new fuses. Chances are fuses probably could be blown, especially on a vehicle if you didn't have an EMP shield on it. And extra breakers for your breaker box in your house. I don't know any reason why a breaker would necessarily go bad, but there's going to be a lot of voltage coming through that line, and it all depends on where the failure points are and all that kind of stuff, and how far you are from your local transformer, and all these there's lots of different variables in there. But it seems to me that it would make sense to have some additional or some extra breakers. And you don't probably want to go spend a whole lot of money on this because it's not super likely, but at least having the ones that would be critical. You know, so let's say you look at your panel and there's like 7 really critical ones, you know, that you got to have. You might want to get at least, you know, those 7, just in case. I don't know for sure. I'm not saying, I've never read anything that says that breakers on a home would go. I know that the EMP Shield would protect them, but I don't know without the EMP Shield if they would get fried or not. I'm thinking they probably would, but I don't know. Let's see. The next thing here is battery charger for cordless tools. So your DeWalt drill, your hand drills and stuff like that. Having a battery charger for those in there would be good. Some of the cordless tools themselves. You know, maybe you've got an older set that you don't use that much or whatever. You've kind of replaced with a newer, better set. Put them old ones inside there. Protect those things, because man, those are super valuable, and you'll be able to use them a lot afterwards. And then the cordless tool batteries as well. Most regular batteries, as long as there's no circuitry in them, won't be affected by the EMP. However, if there's any kind of circuitry or, you know, monitoring technology or anything like that in the battery, then they will probably be affected. So any kind of, you know, cordless tool batteries, I think, would probably go in there. Couldn't hurt, right? Couldn't hurt. That's sort of the idea behind this whole video here, is just to give you guys some things to think about, give you, you know, some ideas, stuff that you could put in a Faraday cage or 2 or whatever. You know, like I said, I'm not super convinced that there is going to be any sort of a nuclear war or anything like that. However, I have started working in my basement to make sure that if I did have to go down there, I've got all the things that I need. You know, food, water, place to sleep, you know, certain level of security, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I'm taking some steps, you know, moving in that direction, just because that's what preppers do, right? We try to think about the things that aren't likely to happen and try to prepare for those things. So, anyhow, that is my list. I'm sure that there's probably 100 other things that should be on this list. And I want you guys to go down in the comments below and tell me, what did I miss? Put down in the comments all the things that we missed. And if you're worried about an EMP, if you've watched the video this far and you don't have an EMP shield on your house or on your vehicle, use the discount code Reality Survival. Save you $50 per unit. Get yourself set up, and at least you've done something to protect yourself in case something bad like this does happen. Yes, there are other things that you need to do to prepare. I'm not saying that putting an EMP shield on there should be the first item that you do. You should have water and food and shelter and security and medical and all those things planned out. But if you've got all the basics covered, then why not think about doing an EMP shield as well? Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to live the 6 Ps. Proper prior preparation prevents poor performance. Stay safe.